Shabbat Shalom. In January, I had the privilege of traveling to Israel with Rabbi Davidson and 17 remarkable members of our congregation. Our group included parents and grandparents, young professionals and teens, longtime members and new members as well. And while some had been to Israel dozens of times before, there were others for whom this was their very first trip. Despite the differences in age and experience, every participant shared one thing in common: a true desire to be in Israel at this moment of challenge and trauma. And so together we made our way east to stand in solidarity with our fellow Israelis, to bear witness to the atrocities of October 7th, and to demonstrate our steadfast support of this people and this nation. Our home base for the mission was Jerusalem. Even in this time of war, Jerusalem remains a place of unparalleled splendor. The light still stuns in its radiant yellows, oranges, and pinks, turning the city into a veritable landscape of gold when the sun hits just right. I was lucky. My hotel room had a small balcony that overlooked the old city, and the view was simply majestic. Take a look. This is Jerusalem's old city at night. It's nothing short of spectacular. Still, I keep returning to this picture because nightfall and darkness have come to be associated with the horrors of October 7th. In Israel, October 7th is colloquially referred to as Hashabbat HaShechorah, the Black Sabbath, a Shabbat of endless night. It was a Shabbat that cloaked this nation in utter darkness and despair as Hamas committed the most unspeakable acts of savagery and violence against the most vulnerable of civilians, including children and elderly, mothers, fathers, even babies. The staggering levels of cruelty and carnage instilled an overwhelming fear in a people known for their fearlessness. As we traveled, so many shared that since that horrific Shabbat morning, they're no longer able to sleep. We heard of children waking every hour from nightmares, parents too. We heard about worries over doors that don't lock and fences that don't fortify homes quite enough. And we heard concerns over what might happen in those vulnerable hours when people close their eyes to the world. We heard, too, of children fearing bad guys and their grown-ups not quite knowing how to calm their fears. They simply didn't know how to respond because they, too, were afraid. Everything they'd been taught to believe about safety and security had been undermined by what transpired on October 7th. I think about a young man that we met on the mission, a man who survived the attacks of October 7th and was with us to share his harrowing tale of that day. He lived on kibbutz near Yitzchak with his wife and 2 kids. A kibbutz he called beautiful and ideal, even though it was barely 3 miles from the border of Gaza. On that Black Sabbath, this sweet kibbutz, known for its endless flower fields and petting zoo, was infiltrated by Hamas terrorists. As this man hid in his safe room alongside his wife and children, he shared, "I had feelings I'd never had before. I served in combat with an Air Force commander unit. I've been shot at before." But sheltering there with his family, not knowing if they would live or die, he said, "I've never felt so scared." And today, even though he and his family survived, the experience still haunts him. Neither he nor his wife know when or if they can return home. He is but one of 200,000 internally displaced persons in Israel whose lives were effectively destroyed on that Black Sabbath day, the day when night overtook this nation. I think too of the hostage families whose loved ones were stolen from them on October 7th. Every day is an endless nightmare for these families who don't know if their loved ones are alive or dead. During our mission, we had the honor of sitting with Lee and Shelley Siegel, brother and sister-in-law of American-Israeli Keith Siegel, who is still being held captive in Gaza. Keith was abducted with his wife Aviva, but while Aviva was set free in the first round of hostage releases, Keith remains captive in Gaza. Keith is a husband, father, and grandfather, and he is known for his tremendously kind and gentle soul with a loving demeanor. He is 64 years old with a variety of health issues, none of which have been attended to by Hamas. Keith's family is in utter agony every moment of every day, and yet they do not stop advocating on Keith's behalf, and they will not rest until Keith is home, safe and sound. There is so much pain and anguish reverberating from this Black Sabbath, from this night that still has no end. And what we witnessed in Israel as we met with people of all ranks and files was a pervasive sadness that touched every heart and every soul. For every Israeli knows somebody who was impacted by October 7th, somebody who was murdered or kidnapped, wounded or traumatized. And everybody knows somebody who has fallen in war. Everywhere we went, people told us about the countless number of funerals they'd already attended and the seemingly endless Shiva calls, too. But even amidst all this darkness, it must be said that there were so many inspiring glimpses of light all around us. I needed only look out my window to see. This is Jerusalem at daybreak, full of vibrant color, radiant light, and yes, even hope. Look at that gorgeous sky. It seems like it might stretch on forever, a vast purpley pink wonderland. Jerusalem at dawn brings with it an air of promise that there is life beyond the darkness. And over again, we saw this promise realized in the strength and resilience manifest throughout Israeli society. Everywhere we looked, we witnessed people helping people in the most magnificent and meaningful of ways. People volunteering in soup kitchens, people donating blood, people packing supplies for soldiers, people opening their homes to evacuee families. In response to our astonishment over this generosity, Israelis would simply say, Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeh Lezeh. All of Israel are responsible for one another. If we don't take care of each other, they would say, who will? Indeed, Israelis have stepped up to care for each other in the most astounding of ways. Take, for example, Tamara Chaimov, one of the extraordinary managers at Iran's Angels, an enormous volunteer operation in Tel Aviv that provides equipment, food, houseware, clothes, appliances, you name it, to soldiers and evacuee families in Israel. As Tamara puts it, they are Amazon for folks in need, and they do not turn anyone away. And everything is given away for free and with a smile. Iran's Angels often host hundreds, if not thousands, of volunteers who distribute thousands of items every single day. Like Tamara, these volunteers all have jobs or careers which they've put aside to serve Israel in its time of need. Tamara says she will not stop until the needs have disappeared, and to see Tamara is to believe her. She's a warrior of goodness, a true angel on this earth. Rabbi Rinat Sefania Schwartz is another superhero that we met on our mission. Rabbi Rinat leads Ve'ahavta, a Reform community in Shoham. Shoham is a town of about 25,000, and it's been hit hard by October 7th. Many families have sent at least one parent or child or both to the front lines, and the community has lost 8 soldiers already to the war. One of their own was taken hostage, Mia Shem, who was thankfully released. But the people who live in Shoham are worn down, fearful, and overwhelmed by the demands of this war. Enter Rabbi Rinat, whose job has expanded 1,000-fold since October 7th. In addition to serving the tremendous spiritual needs of her community, which have only multiplied in the last 4 months, Rabbi Rinat also organizes a meal train for families with soldiers. Multiple times a week, folks come and cook in order to give these families a much-needed break. Rabbi Rinat also leads a daily gathering to call for the release of hostages, a gathering that many in the town have come to rely on. She is resolute in her mission to offer as much care and support as she can humanly sustain. This is her offering to her country in its time of need, and she has no intention of slowing down. The truth is, I could tell you so many stories of incredible strength and resilience that we heard throughout our time in Israel, stories from shopkeepers, reservists, waiters, paramedics, from every walk of life imaginable. I could also tell you about the remarkable ways in which communities are caring for each other, like how the tiny town of Ashalim, made up of 60 families, has opened its doors to something like 60 more families who have been evacuated from the Gaza envelope. I could tell you how the people there have given up their own living space to host families who now have nothing, or how the entire town has banded together to build new homes for these people who saw their own homes destroyed before their eyes. I could tell you how the mayor of that town shared how proud he was to provide shelter and breathing space to these traumatized souls, and how on the day we met him, he was figuring out a way to get a washing machine for every new home. Imagine that. I could tell you all of these stories gathered from less than 96 hours on the ground in Israel, but we would be here all day. And so I will simply leave you with this, a lesson from our Torah portion, Yitro. In this parasha, Yitro, Moses' father-in-law, visits Moses in the desert, and famously, as Yitro watches Moses lead and pastor to the Israelites, he says, "What is this thing you are doing? Why do you act alone? You cannot magistrate and adjudicate all by yourself." In the wake of October 7th and the massacres that have forever changed Israel, we know that Israel cannot find her way back to wholeness all on her own. We know that Israel cannot heal on her own. And we know that Israel cannot move forward from the darkness to the dawn on her own. We must be there to support her, to defend her, to walk alongside her. We must be there to offer our love, encouragement, and compassion. And we must be there to nurture those glimmers of light that will ultimately banish the darkness that has consumed so much of this land. Israel simply can't do it all alone. As we sat together with Rabbi Rinat in a space that doubles as a sanctuary and multi-purpose room, she looked at us and, holding back tears, said, After October 7th, we in Israel felt all alone. But when you and other Jews from around the world, and when anybody from around the world comes to visit us, we feel less alone. May we do everything in our power to help Israel feel less alone in this moment of war and terror. And may we do everything in our power to show Israel our friendship and our love. And finally, in these days where darkness threatens to overtake the dawn, may we do everything in our power to lift up the luminous sparks of light shining all across this nation, bringing hope where hope is nearly gone. Kenny Hiratzon.